Alright, little nubbles. So the Pegasus program, so NSO, those are Jews. So there's kind of two organizations that were basically restricted from ever getting Pegasus. That essentially had these people they attempted to get a copy of it, but that they had to go and do things in somewhat of a roundabout way. Okay, so little nubbles. Essentially, what happens is that in the real NSO, after you blackmail, then you get, if you're like an approved kind of organization, basically, I mean, it'll be, depending on who you are, it'll be minimal kind of stuff in with money. And that, but if you come from the Nazi organizations or the terrorist ones, and they'll kind of know who those are. They will, because they'll they're both anti-Semitic. If they're not Nazis, these organizations are still anti-Semitic. So that kind of is like where when I talk about the gatekeeper stuff and massive backgrounding before you get stuff, they do that with this computer program they do. Alright, so let me tell you how they make a little Nubble's Pegasus. So essentially, they go out to these camps in huge groups. Huge. I mean, this would be like the whole Satan block, okay? And that they're essentially, think of like this being maybe some computer hack, the whole block, and that then there being like 8 functions to the computer app itself. Kind of like, well, like when I type, it makes like pops at me, okay? That would be an example of, essentially they go out and they blackmail this one massive group. They all have these AI Connect speakers and a profile in that system. And then they essentially get a very highly built hacker computer that has like basically one button to it. And so with that, whole infatuated little groups figure out what their little button does. Where a regular group of maybe 9 people might be able to orchestrate the whole computer program. Basically, they need like hundreds of these little dedicated little peddly-wieners, basically, that they all figure out what their little button does. And so once they figure out what it does, then it basically, that little peddly-wiener gets listed as that what that button hack does. And so over time, they start to develop a group that whenever they want to do a certain hack that involves this computer program, they end up building a procedure that bounces around to different people and their one little button exploit. And that then they start testing and they start doing a procedure that essentially it gives them a similar function as what the regular Pegasus computer program is able to achieve. And so that's why I call them little nubbles, because they just have one little stupid little button that has one little stupid little hack to it, okay? So, I mean, I see these are like when I talk about the tech gas, like that's these groups. And that they're not able to really achieve, like this real program would be able to shut down my computer or my iPad, even being brand new. But these groups, these won't really be doing that much nowadays. And that these groups, they sit around like building and testing procedures But that one of the things about it is that some of the main hacking aspects are still like disabled to it. So essentially, it just becomes like a whole series of little small, little, little, just really unknown. Like it's like when I type, it makes little pops every couple of seconds. That that in and itself is like they're not actually doing much to be hacking. I mean, their computer exploit doesn't actually do much other than the keyboard itself raises the button that they have raises the volume or something of the little clicks while you're typing on the keyboard, and it goes pop pop every once in a while. And so that's an example of basically what this this type of stuff achieves. Essentially, when it comes to doing much more than that, these people essentially it minimizes their abilities to do a lot also, and that they probably have a more advanced ability to, I mean, but they have their own version of that type of stuff. But these essentially these rip-off versions of it, these essentially have ways of feeding in through the people that have approved ones, basically. And so, like, if the FBI utilizes this program at like my iPad, then that's where these groups, if they have like a subversive connection to that, are able to push through their connection to be making little sound pops, okay? But with that comes like essentially what they look for in lots of ways is the camera, where somebody holds down, they all test for all that. That's essentially what the main use is, to get camera voyeur to work. And the microphone. And see, this is the type of stuff that the FBI is kind of on. They're not necessarily able to use that anymore. So they kind of have these subversive groups that are attempting to do the same video and microphone hack without actually being at the like official FBI terminals for it. It's like strings through the terminal to the targeted device. And so, little nubbles. These are people that are extremely OCD and people that will spend endless amounts of time figuring out what their stupid little button does. 5 years. They'll spend 5 years trying to figure out what their dumb little button does. And so that is kind of where, that's the kind of shit that, like, if they're like, well, these people, they would have like a Russian one also. But essentially, like in the United States, and like the rejected neo-Nazis and shit, they get this. And then they sit around making little micro exploits. Essentially, it's like all the stuff that you see about Apple and the main exploits and stuff, the stuff that's always 0 time kind of shit, okay? That is where this exploits that stuff in the macro way. These would be an example of probably what ends up being like what the AI uses to create a macro exploit. These little, like, like this little button that makes the pops loud. More than likely, there's probably some sort of touch keyboard exploit that 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 essentially links the main exploit links potentially back to the sound volume of the click pops, and that's what potentially the macro is built from. And so some of this stuff might actually lead towards some of the main exploits. See, potentially, if you fix one of these little obsessive little fucking nubblies, little button, potentially, potentially fixing that might fix the whole major exploit, or half of it, or a quarter of it, or something like that. And so, just remember that essentially this utilizes the AI knows exactly what the exploit is in ways, and that it probably stems from these little small little annoyance hacks that end up probably just being the main. See, sometimes people are always looking at this macro stuff, but that the AI builds like a worm kind of out of the exploit. So if the main like exploit ends up just being like the volume of the keyboard and the clicks, see, that's print audio. And so in the ideas of audio visual, print is considered it's considered a visual audio because the print itself segues to like a speech recognition, or like a Stephen Hawking box, which is an older kind of like, which is an older like audio, and that might have something to do with, because I know that this stuff operates off of an audio visual video idea when it makes its exploits. So a lot of these things derive out of some sort of audio visual video exploitation of whatever the hack is. So the the thing about print is that print typing is also a language that older computers can turn into a digitized voice out. And so in ways, the visual print has a path to audio, and then that links with the AI, and that then the AI potentially has this like little click that's also an audio out of a speaker. And so then it kind of links or views those as a similarity. And that then what you might start to see is that then print becomes least audio, and then the little click pops become most audio, and that's kind of like where maybe the sub macro exploit. And so that's where I know all the NSOs, they get in trouble. They get in trouble because if they can't keep their stupid pedo banger Pegasus from fucking up people's shit in Israel, then they get in trouble. You know, they get in like religious trouble. So a lot of times that can lead towards potentials for exploits that get fixed. Okay? I mean, this is kind of what it is. It's like, you know, those guys, they do the like speaker stuff. Okay? So they have speakers. So essentially there's like rule sets that they're not allowed to talk about it. But if like some rabbi yells at them and commands them or something, then they're like required in ways, or they'll get sound tortured for not doing what their religious leader master commands them to fucking do. So, the importance of Israel's 32 most righteous people. The Israelis will probably have a list like that. That's their apocalypse list. Okay, so those people, they potentially have a lot of power over Petabang Pegasus and the people that made that, because essentially those people represent people that they would be forced to have to listen and do what they say. So keep that in mind. That might be a diplomatic solution to some of this stuff. Here's where these people are so fucking crazy OCD and obsessive that in ways they probably find things that people at the Pegasus program would have never even known about. Potentially. And so that's why I say that whatever the main exploit is, that's the stuff that you still can't potentially shut off for these people that rip off these copies. And so that's why I say that sometimes the least is probably related to the most, or maybe in this clicky way, the sub exploit. You see, that's where I know that they do. They do. They call it Pegasus. So that is a wizard term. And that potentially the top exploit is a wizard block. And so potentially there might be something to add a second team to be figuring out what the little annoyance stuff is and shit. See, what you really gotta do is just start unloading all the Mormons in your area, all of their little secrets, their little dumb temple. And then what you'll find is little terrorist little Mormonies will start using their little clicky pops at you. And you might be able, if you have like an internal scan computer, you might be able to get the direct file that they're fucking with or something like that. Okay? And then that might be the file to analyze that. And then potentially it can, essentially in ways, it could fall into like 9 major exploits or 8 major exploits that could potentially derive from stuff that fits into a least audio to most audio, or least visual to most visual, or least video to most video, or least audio in most video, or least visual in most audio, that type of stuff. And that ends up being where that is kind of how this AI is it's a broadband AI. It's a data stream broadband AI. So that is essentially where it will fall into some very basic categories of audio, visual, and video.